My soul praise the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God.
Well, we might get started or we might not get started. Huh! I'm going to have to walk back to the projector room. I'm sorry. Something didn't work. Never fails. All right. That's what happens when you sit up here fat, dumb, and happy and you think everything's just fine. Normally I check it, but I was lazy this morning. Good morning. So I was excited to see Bobby and Shirley Gardner walk in, so life is good. All the way here from the big state of Kentucky. They live in a really large city in Kentucky, so. All right. Good times. So, we are making progress, although not as quickly as I had intended. My fault, because I just spend too much time on the detail. But we will get Ezra finished as long as Tommy does chapters 7 and 8 at the end of the month. He's laughing over there. So we might not get Ezra finished. We already killed Nehemiah. We know we can't get there. It was a big bite to try to chunk off on one thing. So last week, if you remember, Haman had to pull a horse around town and show Mordecai off to the world, saying, this is what happens to somebody who delights the king. And of course, he doesn't like Mordecai very much because Mordecai will not bow down to him, and he can't handle it. So he made plans. His wife and his associates suggested, well, let's just build us a 75-foot gallows out here. We'll hang him on it. But we haven't got to that point yet. So this is our timeline of Esther, and we're going to cross the line today. We're going to do chapter 7 and 8. I know that's very aggressive, but we have to do that to give Tommy a fighting chance at the end of the month. So that's where we're at. All right, let's get moving here. All right, so Haman is taken to the banquet by a couple of the king's eunuchs, and I wonder how he felt. He'd been humiliated by Mordecai, and his wife and his associates had said, now that this has happened, Mordecai's just going to be the end of you. And so what do we know? He's really happy that the queen's invited him to yet another dinner feast, but he's not happy about what happened with Mordecai. I think right at this moment, Haman doesn't really understand that why Mordecai was actually honored and why he was passed over by the king, because isn't he the king's favorite prime minister? Don't know. You think he would have been consulted? Yes. The prime minister, second in command of all of Persia, but apparently not so much. So Esther, she and Mordecai cooked up a plan where they would, handle things a little bit differently. And now they're coming to a feast. Big, big deal. And this was another one of those meshetas, which is the big drinking feast that they have. More drinking, less feasting. But that's an event. Esther's got to kind of turn up the courage a little bit, because now she's really going to have to deal with the situation. But she's ready. Now the king, what he really wants to know is what Esther wants. He is so curious about, she postponed her request, she's made another feast. The king says, look, even to half my kingdom, what is it that you want? He asked her 3 times. He asked her 3 times. 3 times. 3 times. What is it that you want? And really, he calls her the queen. Good terms, But, Esther has literally got to be livid with Haman, I think. But she's basically able to control her emotions and keep things in check so that things don't go sideways, because things have a way of going wrong, like my slides this morning. Anyway, that's what happens. And so she's got to kind of play it cool, back down some, Esther had to really kind of be a diplomat. So when she finally makes her request, she says, really, king, all I want is my life and the lives of my people. She's asking as softly as she can, and she even says, if I had heard that we were simply going to be turned into slaves, that would have been fine. I wouldn't have bothered the king with that. We'd have just accepted what our lot was, and that's what would have happened. But she basically says, me and my people have been sold to be slaughtered. That's exactly what she says. Is there some kind of an inference in the word sold? I don't know. Was she trying to impress upon the king the gravity of the situation? She's one of the things she's careful about is to make sure the king understands the contributions that the Jews made to Persia, because they were filling every part of Persian life. Many of them were satraps, they were leaders, some of them were quite wealthy. Daniel was a very wealthy man. And some of these people were really hooked into the Persian way of life, and they were contributing. So a lot of these people that are going to be executed because of this edict that was sent forth are in positions of power. It's not going to look very good, you know. Technically, if you think about it, although it's been many years, the Jews were really prisoners of war. You know, when Nebuchadnezzar came in and took them out of their homeland, they really were prisoners. But the approach was, we're going to take you from your homeland and we're going to put you in our country, and you're going to integrate into our life, you know, how we live. Maybe they learned to speak Persian. Maybe they learned to speak some other language, depending on the province they were in. You remember how big Persia was, you know, from Ethiopia all the way into northern Russia. We're talking about a lot of land and a lot of different kinds of people. Somebody estimated like 70 different languages and dialects. So that's a lot of, you know, different things that you have to work into your life. I imagine that most of the Jews probably were around the capital cities, but not necessarily. That's just a guess on my part. But Esther said, if our social status had changed from being integrated into Persia to being slaves, well, we could deal with that. And she wouldn't have bothered the king with that. But, you know, the fact that they've been sold to be executed, and I think, you know, Haman had already offered the king, 10,000 talents of silver? But that would not have paid for the loss of the economic or intellectual or political loss of that many people that were part of the Persian Empire at that time. So when you think about it, that was not very much. The Jews made a lot of contributions, and in many cases they were nearly equal to those of native Persians. Yes, Tommy?
Jeremiah's prophecy told Israelite people, pray for the welfare of people who have captured you, because their welfare is where you will find your welfare.
Exactly.
So they were instructed to help the welfare of the country that they were in, and obviously they're doing a good job.
Yes, that's what they did, because, you know, it's just like we're told that we're to be in subjection to the governments that are placed over us, and part of subjection means that you integrate into the culture, that you know, live under the rule and you obey the rules. And as long as the Jews were able to comply with the rules, and I'm thinking, you know, the way the Persian, now the Babylonians not so much, but the way the Persians operated is they took people in and they took over their land, but they didn't destroy their individual cultures. In other words, they didn't say, okay, from this day forth you will look, talk, act, be, worship, you know, as a Persian. They just basically brought them into their environment and let them acclimatize to that environment. So it was a little bit different. So, but the plight of the Jews isn't slavery, it's imminent annihilation. That's what's coming. And the king, you know, I think he's going to realize that, well, if this comes to pass, not only am I going to lose the queen, but I'm going to lose a lot of resources if this happens. And so, at this point, you know, she hasn't yet disclosed it, because now she's just asking for this and making it this. So I don't think it really dawned on Haman quite yet what's about to happen, you know. First of all, I doubt Haman knew that Esther was a Jew. I have no doubt. She never disclosed it because Mordecai told her not to. Mordecai was the only one who had disclosed that he was a Jew. You know, so here's old Haman. He's sitting at the table. Now, they have reclined at the table. They have these couches, kind of like extended lazy boy kind of thing, where they just kind of recline, and the food's right over here, and they just pick up a grape and eat it, and they just leisurely work through their meal. Maybe they had cup holders in the arms or something for the 2 glasses of wine they had to deal with, but still, it's all it. And then the king says, "Who did this?" And here's old Haman sitting on the couch. And Esther says, "It was that horrible man, Haman, the traitor, who was right there with him." I can't picture this, But now, the king knows what Haman did, because Haman came and told him what he's going to do. He may not have gone into all the detail, but he basically knew that he gave his ring to Haman to do with as pretty much he wished. So, but he may not have, because it was not disclosed to him. It's just a people, a group of people. That's a true statement. Haman actually lied to him. He told him that there was an insurrection. In other words, this group of people was rising up against him, and the only way we're going to solve the problem is to do away with them. So basically, he kind of painted a picture that wasn't exactly correct. So, a lot of people say that, well, it's Xerxes' fault, but honestly, it's not. I mean, to the extent that he gave too much power to Haman, maybe, but we'll find there's a little twist in the story pretty quickly. So, now he's identified. What happens? Well, what happens is the king's mad. He's really steamed, but a few years in power have matured him a little bit, and instead of flying off the handle immediately, he just gets up and walks out to the garden so he can think about it for a little while. Now, Haman, on the other hand, probably did not think about it as much as he should have. But the king goes out to the garden, and he's thinking, man, I've been duped by this guy I hired to be my prime minister. He lied to me about the Jews being disobedient to Persian laws, because he knew how integrated the Jewish culture, the Jews were, into his culture. He knew that. He knew what they did and that they were making contributions. He was not ignorant of those facts. And he's sitting here. Now he's been told it's the Jews, and these are the people that Haman wanted to get rid of. I suspect if Haman had come out in the very beginning and said, I really don't like those Jews, blah, 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 the king would have probably told him, go get a life. And we're not doing anything like that. But, he went out to cool off. And so Haman stayed behind, and I see Haman looking at Esther saying, what am I going to do? Well, the only thing possible. He already knew the king was mad. So he wasn't going to get past the king. But he thought, maybe if I can petition Esther to spare me, I'm adding to the story a little bit, but maybe if I can, get Esther to intercede for me, well, that's probably not a great idea. But, so I suspect it started out kind of soft. The Hebrew word is bakwashand, and today's English, right, it says beg, but it's not quite beg. It's more or less kind of a discreet request. Hey, can you help me out here? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this, but that's not getting much help. So he goes over to beg at that point, and he probably puts his hand on the sofa that she's reclining on to talk to her on a more of a personal nature, and the king walks in. Uh-oh. And the king, he looks at the situation and he says, this doesn't really look too good. Haman has committed a rather serious faux pas when he fell upon the couch. Apparently his only intention was to get Esther to spare his life. But, as soon as he fell down on that couch, the king walks in. So what does the king see? He doesn't see something he likes very well. And, well, are you going to assault the king while I'm outside the room, even now? He's thinking, hey, the queen's already identified me as the culprit here. The king says, what are you doing? You trying to assault the queen? And so, hey, Ahasuerus/Xerxes, just a mere mention. And the strong men come up. Now, I'm going to tell you two different stories. You may pick the one you like to hear. There is the covering the head or face was a euphemism for execution. So it could have been that they came in and killed him immediately. Like, tie a bag over your head and pull the string and strangle the guy. I don't know if that's right. The other one is they just, covered his head because he was now a prisoner and he was going to be placed on house arrest. There's two different things. Basically, if you look at Livy and Cicero, who are Roman historians, and some Greek historians, they basically say that covering a face or putting a hood over somebody's face for a man that's been condemned is because he's no longer worthy to see the light. So, honestly, I'm not really sure. I have some thoughts about it, but and the Greeks and Romans, they probably copied their procedure of covering the condemned's head from the Persians. So he was now in the custody of the palace guard and under house arrest, more or less. Well, what happens here is that one of the king's eunuchs, Harbona, who was one of the 7 chamberlains, eunuchs were put in positions of power within the king's household, so that they were the chief butler, they were the chief, whatever. And so these were the guys that basically handled the king's business in the house, in the palace, in the throne room, whatever. And so this is not the first time we've heard about Harbona. We heard about Harbona when he was one of the ones that was sent to get Vashti. So these eunuchs that are placed in these special positions, they serve for a long time. And so they don't leave very often unless they get executed for doing something they shouldn't have done, but they're eunuchs. They may not get in trouble. And he had been informed about Haman's gallows. Now, we've talked about how the Persians did things. Gallows were not the cross arm with the rope on it. Gallows was a sharp-pointed pole. And typically, executions were sometimes by directly impaling the condemned on the pole, but sometimes they were killed first, and the pole was just merely to show off, here's who the bad dude was. But 50 cubits, right there at Mordecai's house, apparently. And, according to Harbona, was right in the courtyard of Mordecai's house. So he was going to make sure that all of Susa knew about Mordecai. Well, Harbona also knew that Mordecai had spoken good of the king and had advised him. So Harbona, because of his position, he knew about what Mordecai had done. He knew about, I suspect that some of those eunuchs may have even had some kind of an idea about a relationship between Mordecai and Esther, because Mordecai was always hanging around. I don't know. It's just a guess. But as far as we're concerned, Mordecai hadn't disclosed her heritage until just then. And so the king said, hey, that's a great idea. Go put Haman on the pole. You know, why would you let a perfectly good gallows go to waste? It's not going to be used for Mordecai, so we might as well use it for Haman. And so, now, Haman did not get a jury of his peers. Just saying. The king was the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, and the defense, all in one. Justice was very swift in those days. There was not a lot of due process taking place. You know, once the king was convinced that you were wrong, you were wrong. And very little could be done about that unless you could drag up some honorable witnesses to speak on your behalf. And unfortunately, those may not have been present at that time. And Harbona said, you know, Haman's got a grudge against Mordecai. He knew all this stuff. And so he was planning to enjoy that execution of Mordecai. But, you know, Proverbs says, whoever digs a pit will fall into it. A stone will come back on him who starts it rolling. That's Proverbs 26:27, you know. What goes around comes around. So, and that's really what that says. What's that? Give him enough rope. That's exactly right. In this case, Haman had more than enough rope, and he took care of things, but not probably as he should have. So, when a criminal is executed, this was customary in Persian culture, the property that that person owned, possessed, would be given to the royal treasury, the royal estate. Well, it now belongs to the king. He can do whatever he wants to with it. He decides to give it to Esther. Now, whenever somebody gives you a gift, do you turn around and give that away to somebody else in front of the person that gave it to you? No, you don't. So Esther's got this house, property, whatever it was. Estate is a good word, his estate. But the king said, I'm going to make a gift of this to you, Esther. This is now yours. And Esther, as we know, she eventually turned it over to Mordecai to manage. It was still hers, but Mordecai was going to manage it, which means it was going to be his estate. She didn't need it. So, but, you know, Haman's estate was worth millions. Yes, sir.
During this period in history and time, women were not allowed to be in contract with anything, nor allowed to actually physically own the property.
That's actually a good point.
And therefore, she had to pick a guardian at that point in order to be legal with the law.
That's a really good point, Tommy. That women normally were not placed in charge of those kinds of things. So, yeah, she would have had to find a guardian, which is what Tommy's pointing out. You know, when this, as the story unfolds in Jewish history, Haman is basically called the Jews' enemy. And Haman continued to be the poster child for the Jews' enemy throughout time. It was much longer than just this event. They would recall Haman and what he did, because what happened is, well, we'll find out. I don't want to spoil next week. Anyway, just understand that the Jews used Haman as a scapegoat for a lot of things that went wrong. He was the example of what an enemy is. And so when they were to I have to talk about this because I can't explain it if I don't. There's a celebration called Purim. All right, we don't know about that celebration yet, but I have to talk about it right now. But basically, whenever they would do the Purim reading in the synagogue, there would be people who would make a loud noise. They'd beat on the tables and everything when they talked about that. And when they mentioned Haman's name, everybody kind of said, "Hey, my baby," you know, that kind of a thing. And there's a picture that was done in the 19th century by a Polish painter, and it shows Haman leading Mordecai through the streets of Susa, and Haman's wife Zeresh, she thinks it's Mordecai leading the horse, and she dumps a pot of slop on him when he's walking. It's a neat picture. You can find it on the web if you want to, but she mistakes because he's leading the horse through. She thinks it's Mordecai, and the high official is her husband, I guess, is what she thinks. But anyway, the king gave his ring, his signet ring, which he'd repossessed from Haman by now. He gave that to Mordecai. So basically, Mordecai is replacing Haman as the Grand Vizier. And he was a high official in the second highest official, as we'll find out, in the king's court for as long as Xerxes ruled. And if history is taken into account, Mordecai went through a couple rulers. In other words, it wasn't just Xerxes. There were some more rulers that Mordecai maintained his position with through time. So you can think about that however you want to. So he took the ring off his finger and he gave it to Mordecai. And so the power that was Haman's, that he so incorrectly wielded, was transferred to Mordecai. And so Mordecai could act in the king's name, just like Haman did. And so there's our change of command, just like Haman's wife and wise men had told him would happen. Mordecai is going to be your downfall. I'm sure that before Mordecai moved into the estate, he had the gallows removed. I don't think I would have wanted that reminder in my front yard. So that would have been my take. And so even though Haman, he's been removed from the process, he's not a problem, but the edict is still out there. It's not gone. Just because Haman died did not mean the edict left. So, Persian laws can't be changed. Once the king makes a declaration, turns it into an edict, it's published, and he can't go back on that. And so the king indicates that he's ready to do whatever needs to be done, but he's also, got to be careful how he does this. So what happens is that Esther might have had some doubts about it, but, the king now knew she was a Jewess, and she keeps saying, if I have found favor. Everything she does is with a dose of humility. In other words, before Esther speaks, she always thinks about what is going to happen when I do this. She's better at that than I am. Sometimes I don't always think through the process before I speak. But apparently, she was much better. And so, Esther's basically saying that I can't allow this thing to happen because, and she's really not thinking about her. I mean, yeah, the genocide is horrible, but it's even more horrible if I would have to be the one who would allow this to happen. In other words, I cannot sanction this. I can't be a part of this. If I've got the ability to make a change, I need to do this. But right now, she and all the Jews are kind of on the horns of a dilemma. Yes, Tommy?
This also goes directly against the prophecy that Jeremiah
Right.
Because I'm going to use you to come back to Jerusalem.
And they had multiplied in Persia. 2 generations over that 70 years made a lot more Jews. So that's a good point. And so what she's basically saying is, I won't be clean, I won't be ritually clean if I allow this kind of a thing to take place. The laws can't be changed. The king has decreed it. But the king says, I can't change this because it would violate a fundamental policy that we have in the Persian government. The king executed Haman, didn't have any problem with that. He was the Jews' archenemy. So the king cannot allow the Jews to be executed because it would have destroyed the Persian government because there were so many Jews embedded in the government as well. And so that would have been a real big problem. But what he says is, I can't do this, but you guys got the ring. And you got the ability to issue a command. So while I can't do this, while it's impossible for me to rescind my request, perhaps you and Mordecai can come up with a way to solve this problem because you now have the ring and the seal. Surely you can with the royal power at your disposal. In other words, the king's not saying he's going to reverse the edict, but he's going to say, you got all of the power of the Persian kingdom to get something done. So surely you can, with all that power, devise some way to save your people. And once he hinted to Esther that the power was within her hands to fix the problem, she and Mordecai got to it. So they got the scribes. This is an interesting piece of trivia for you. Esther 8, verse 9, may be the longest sentence in the Hebrew Old Testament. It is the longest sentence in the Hebrew Hagiographa, which is the books of poetry and wisdom. And if you ever read that, and I'm not reading it, it's very long. It's a very long sentence. You talk about run-on sentences. If we have any English teachers in here, you can structure that sentence. But Haman's decree, it had gone out in the 13th of Nisan, which was that first month in the Jewish calendar. And so 2 months later, on the 23rd of Sivan, which is the Jewish third month, which corresponds to our May-June time frame, Mordecai issued a decree in the name of the king. And so I'm not sure whether all the Jews were aware of what Haman had done. Now, it did go out through all the provinces and stuff, but it had only been a couple of months. Maybe word hadn't filtered out to everybody. I don't know. I know that Susa was very well aware of it because they were in uproar over the declaration. And so Mordecai's new declaration goes out. And so what happens? Well, he comes up with a way to solve the problem. He says, here's what's going to happen. Since Haman's edict wasn't to go into effect until the 13th of Adar, which is the 12th month, they still had like 11 months to get there. So, or 8 months, whatever it is, 8 months. And so they still had some time. There's plenty of time to solve the problem. So what he says is, on that day, you are allowed to defend yourself. Now, next week when we finish up Esther, I'm not sure you're going to get that sense. But if you read this initially, what it says is that you can defend yourself from anyone who attacks you. So basically what it's saying that is, if any Persian organization, group, person, or whatever comes after you on that day, you are allowed to defend yourself to the extent necessary. If you have to kill them, kill them. If you just merely have to repel them. But the sense here is defending yourself. But he goes on to say that if you defend yourself and those people fall, you're entitled to the spoils. In other words, you can take their possessions as a part of that process. So at that time, we were about 60 different nations, and they were divided into 127 provinces, and all of these different languages we've already talked about. Throughout all these, the scribes have got to, like we talked about with Haman, they've got to translate into all of these different languages. They've got to write it out in different languages. So the people that were working as the scribes were pretty smart people. These were very intelligent people. Some of them spoke a number of different languages. And so they were able to get this thing out. And the king said, what we're going to do, we're going to find a way to disseminate this as quickly as possible. And so I think, if I read the history about this correct, Mordecai also sent a copy of the original edict as well. So when it went out, it went, here's the original edict, and here's a copy of the new one that we're going to use to prevent ourselves from all getting executed at that point in time. So what happens here is that the letters were sent out using the royal livery. They could deliver a letter from the king to the farthest reach of the empire in 1 week. So that was the original Pony Express. The horses they used were bred by the royal breeding men. I don't know what you call those guys. What do you kind of call it? Breeds horses. Anyway, a horse breeder. That's what you call them. Anyway, all of these were specially bred horses. They were very fast. They were very powerful horses. They used these horses to deliver the mail when it had to go. Now, the Persian postal system was pretty unique at that time. Matter of fact, they really had it down pretty well. So the government's Pony Express delivered all of that out, got it all out quickly, so they had plenty of time to prepare. The Jews had 8 months to get ready for what was about to happen. So they could get organized, they could unite, they could be prepared to stand for their life. And again, they were granted permission not just to defend themselves, but if something happened to the people that they were died, they could have their spoils, if you were. So this is all a good thing. So evidently, Mordecai was apparently given royal robes to wear, signifying his appointment by the king to a position. So, it said he was in, this royal garb. He even had his own crown, not the crown that was the king's, obviously. But the crown word, the Hebrew is a terah, and not the word kether. Kether designates like Esther's royal crown, and a tereth is for a lower official who wore a crown. So I guess they had a lot of crowns, but it was enough of a crown that the Persians could look and see, well, this guy's pretty high on the list of pecking order, so that was a good thing. And so now that they know the Jews will be able to defend themselves, most of the people in Susa were much happier, and I'm sure that the Jews were very happy, because now they can rejoice over the fact that there's no longer going to be an extermination of the Jews, and they're going to be allowed to defend themselves. So I think, all in all, things worked out okay. So where are we? We've gotten rid of Haman. We've written an edict that says, okay, we can't prevent people from attacking you, but you are allowed to defend yourself. So that's where things have been left. One of the things I read in a commentary was that there were a number of Persian, in particular in Susa, that had converted to Judaism. In other words, they were proselytized Jews. They were foreign people who had adopted the Jewish way of life and worshiping the Jewish God. And so because of that, there would have been people in Susa who had Jewish friends. They would not themselves have the Jewish bloodline in them, but they would have been, brothers, sisters, that kind of a thing. And so that's one of the reasons that Susa was so upset when the edict came out, because they were going to lose a lot of their friends. And so now everybody in Susa is happy because there's a solution at hand, and things were going to work out. I was surprised at the proselytized Jews comment, but I was able to confirm that in a couple different commentaries and some Jewish historians. So you take that for free information. All right. I think we can probably have a prayer and close it down for the morning. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for allowing us to be together this morning and to study your word. Father, we know that you are the great Redeemer and that you can take care of us. And we ask, Father, that we'll put our lives in your hands, that we'll trust you enough to understand you want nothing but the best for us. And all you require of us is to share the good news of Jesus with others that we come in contact with, and to honor you every day of our lives. We ask, Father, that you'll bless us always. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.